She was desperate. He was untouchable. One night, one deal, a choice that should have ruined her, but instead changed everything. What happens when a heartless billionaire offers a struggling woman a deal she can't refuse? And what if that deal turns into something far more dangerous, something neither of them were prepared for? Love, betrayal, redemption, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Because some nights don't end at sunrise. They last forever. Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories, where passion meets fate and love is never as simple as it seems. If you love heart-wrenching romance, shocking twists, and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, then this is the place for you. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that will steal your breath away. Because here, every love story has a secret, and every secret has the power to change everything. Are you ready? The clock on the office wall read 9:47 p.m., but Emily Carter hardly noticed. The hum of the fluorescent lights above her head and the quiet clacking of her fingers on the keyboard were the only sounds filling the dimly lit office space. Her colleagues had long gone home. The grand, towering building of Bennett Enterprises, a symbol of power and wealth, felt eerily silent. Emily, however, had nowhere to go, not yet. Her shift had ended hours ago, but she had stayed behind, hoping to pick up some overtime work. Every extra dollar counted. Her mother's hospital bills were suffocating her like an iron chain wrapped around her neck. No matter how many hours she put in, how many meals she skipped, how many times she denied herself basic necessities, it was never enough. With a deep breath, she pulled up her mother's medical records on her phone, her vision blurring as she read through the expenses. A painful lump formed in her throat. $22,564.73. That was the amount due, a crushing sum for someone who barely had $156 in her bank account. Her trembling fingers gripped her phone tightly as she hesitated, then clicked on the message from the hospital. Final notice. If payment is not received by tomorrow morning, treatment will be put on hold. Her heart stopped. Tears burned her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Crying wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't save her mother. She had already exhausted every option. She had begged for a salary advance, but HR had refused. She had asked for loans, but her credit was already stretched thin. She had pawned off her mother's jewelry, heirlooms her mother had once cherished, and still it barely made a dent in the amount owed. A deep sigh left her lips as she shut her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The weight of hopelessness pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break something. Instead, she did what she always did. She endured. Taking a shuddering breath, she rubbed her temples. The office was cold, but she didn't shiver. She was too numb to feel anything anymore. She glanced at her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop. The woman staring back at her looked exhausted. Her once vibrant hazel eyes were dull, rimmed with dark circles. Her normally soft, wavy brown hair was tied into a messy bun. The light in her eyes that once sparkled with dreams had dimmed. When had she become this? A woman barely surviving. A woman constantly fighting against life, yet always losing. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. But food was a luxury when every cent needed to be saved. Just as she closed her eyes for a brief moment of rest, her phone rang. She nearly dropped it in her rush to answer. "Hello?" Her voice cracked from exhaustion. "Miss Carter?" The voice on the other end was familiar. Dr. Reynolds. A tremor ran down her spine. The doctor never called unless it was bad news. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she held her breath. "Please, God, no." "I don't mean to pressure you, but we need the payment by tomorrow morning," he said gently, as if he could hear her heart breaking. "The hospital has policies, and without the next installment, we will have to halt your mother's treatment." Emily's blood ran cold. "Halt her treatment?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Miss Carter, I truly am." There was genuine sympathy in his tone. "I know how much you love your mother, but our hands are tied." Emily's vision blurred. The sterile hospital room flashed in her mind. Her mother lying there, fragile and weak, relying on machines to keep her alive. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she struggled to find her voice. "Isn't there any way, any exception?" There was a long pause. Then, "If we don't receive the payment by 10 a.m. tomorrow, we will have no choice." Her heart cracked. She opened her mouth to beg, to plead. But what was the point? The call ended. Emily stared at the screen, feeling the walls of her world collapse around her. Her hand shook violently as she clutched her phone against her chest. Her mother, her only family, the woman who had raised her with "unwave." The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bennett Enterprises, a breathtaking view that most people would kill to see. But Logan Bennett wasn't admiring the beauty of the city. His sharp blue eyes were locked onto something else, or rather, someone else. Emily Carter. She was sitting at her desk long after everyone had left, her shoulders slumped, her head in her hands. She was beautiful. He had noticed that long ago. But tonight there was something different about her, something broken. Logan tapped his pen against the sleek mahogany desk, watching her through the glass walls of his office. He had seen desperation before, in the eyes of men begging for investments, in the faces of women trying to claw their way into his world. But Emily's desperation was different. It wasn't greed, it wasn't ambition, it was pure, raw pain. And for some reason, he couldn't look away. With a sigh, he stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. He didn't do attachments, he didn't do emotions. Yet before he could stop himself, he stepped out of his office and strode toward her desk. "Miss Carter," he said, his deep, commanding voice breaking the silence. Emily gasped, her head snapping up. The moment their eyes met, Logan felt something shift in the air. There was fear in her eyes, and something else, something she was trying desperately to hide. "Mr. Bennett," she stammered, standing quickly. I didn't realize you were still here." "I could say the same to you," he said, crossing his arms. "Long after our shift?" She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of her desk. "Just trying to catch up on some work." Liar. Logan knew it instantly, and suddenly he wanted to know why. He studied her, her trembling fingers, the way she couldn't quite meet his gaze, the way she looked like she was trying to hold herself together with sheer willpower. And then his eyes flicked to her phone, still lit up with a text message. "Final notice. If payment is not received by tomorrow morning, treatment will be put on hold." His sharp mind pieced it together immediately. The sleepless nights, the exhaustion in her face, the worry she carried like a heavy weight. She was in trouble. And for the first time in a long time, Logan felt something stir inside him. Curiosity. Before she could hide her phone, he said, "How much do you need?" Emily froze. Her breath hitched as she looked up at him, eyes wide with shock. I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Logan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Don't lie to me, Miss Carter." His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it. "Tell me how much you need." Her lips parted, her face paling. This was it. Her secret, her pride, her walls, all crumbling in front of him. She hesitated. Then so softly he almost didn't hear, she whispered the number. Logan's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. That amount meant nothing to him. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a checkbook, flicking it open with ease. "I'll write you a check," he said, "under one condition." Emily's pulse pounded. A condition? Her throat felt dry. What condition? Logan leaned in, his voice like silk and sin. "Spend one night with me, and I'll take care of everything." The world tilted beneath her feet. She stared at him, her breath stolen, her heart slamming against her ribs. Did she hear him right? A night, one night, for enough money to save her mother. Emily's hands trembled. She felt disgusted, humiliated, angry, but most of all, she felt trapped. Her mind screamed at her to say no, to walk away. But then she thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, fighting for her life. She thought of the medical bills, the doctors who would turn her mother away. Tears burned the backs of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to Logan's. His face was unreadable, his piercing blue eyes holding no emotion. To him, this was nothing. A game, a business transaction. But to her, it was everything. Her lips trembled. Her pride screamed at her to walk away, but her heart whispered, "Do it." So she did the only thing she could. She swallowed the lump in her throat. She clenched her fists to stop them from shaking, and in a voice so quiet, so broken, she whispered, "Okay." The city stretched beneath Emily like a sea of golden lights, but she hardly noticed. As the elevator ascended, carrying her toward the Yangtze unknown, her heart pounded with an intensity that almost made her dizzy. What am I doing? The question had been haunting her from the moment she stepped into the black luxury car that had arrived to pick her up, from the moment she was led through the marble lobby of Bennett Towers, a place where only the world's most powerful resided. And now, as the doors slid open to the penthouse floor, her breath caught. It was stunning. The space was massive, lined with towering glass windows that revealed the night sky in all its glory. A sleek, modern fireplace flickered warmly, casting a golden glow across the expensive leather furniture and rich wooden accents. Everything was perfection, cold, untouchable, luxurious, much like the man standing in the middle of it. Logan Bennett. He had changed out of his work attire, now dressed in a simple black button-down, the top few buttons undone, revealing a glimpse of hard muscle beneath. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing his strong forearms, veins visible beneath smooth skin. He looked dangerous, powerful, devastatingly handsome. Emily swallowed. She had prepared herself for many things tonight, for indifference, for a cold exchange, for the kind of soulless arrangement she had seen in movies. But she had not prepared for this. The flickering candlelight, the smell of something delicious wafting from the dining area, the way Logan was looking at her, not with hunger but with something far deeper. "I thought we'd have dinner first," he said, his voice smooth like warm whiskey. "Unless you'd rather." He trailed off, his meaning clear. Her cheeks burned. "No, dinner is fine," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded and gestured for her to follow. At the dining table, she hesitated. The meal before her looked like something out of a five-star restaurant. Perfectly seared steak, grilled asparagus, and a glass of deep red wine waiting beside it. Emily sat down cautiously. "You cook this?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Logan smirked as he poured her wine. "I don't always let my chef have all the fun." She stared at him. This was not what she had expected. He was supposed to be cold, detached, a man who saw her as nothing more than a body to be bought. Instead, he was gentle, curious, interested. As they ate, he asked questions, real questions. "What made you choose your field of work? What's your favorite childhood memory? What's the one thing you've always dreamed of doing?" Emily answered cautiously at first, afraid of what this was. Afraid of the trap. But as the night deepened, she found herself relaxing. No man had ever listened to her like this, not just hearing the words, but truly listening. Logan watched her with rapt attention, his piercing blue eyes locked onto her every expression, as if memorizing the way she spoke, the way her lips curled when she laughed softly, the way her eyes glowed when she spoke of dreams she had long abandoned. And then, at some point, she realized this was dangerous. Not the night, not the deal. Him. Logan Bennett was dangerous because he was nothing like she had expected, and that terrified her. When dinner was finished, he stood and held out a hand. A choice. She could take it, or she could walk away. Her fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, strong, and when he led her toward the massive glass windows overlooking the city, she didn't pull away. The silence between them was thick, electric. Then slowly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Emily shivered, not from fear, but from the way his touch set her skin on fire. Emily, he murmured. Her name on his lips was intoxicating. She knew what was coming, and she should have resisted. But when he leaned in, his breath warm against her skin, her lips parted in silent anticipation. His kiss was soft at first, a slow caress against her trembling mouth, a gentle promise, a whispered question. Then when she melted against him, he deepened it. A slow, consuming fire that sent heat pooling in her veins. Emily had been kissed before, but never like this. Never like she mattered. Logan's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, his body firm and warm against hers. His hands traced a slow, reverent path down her back, as if memorizing every inch of her. This wasn't just desire. This was something deeper, something raw, something neither of them expected. By the time he lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the bedroom, Emily knew nothing would ever be the same again. That night she had sold herself to a man she barely knew, but as he kissed her, worshipped her, made her feel cherished in a way she never had before, she realized she wasn't the only one who had surrendered. Logan had too. The first thing Emily felt was warmth, the soft caress of silk sheets, the gentle weight of an arm draped over her waist, the slow, steady rhythm of a heartbeat beneath her ear. For a moment she didn't move. She just lay there, caught in the space between dreams and reality, where everything felt perfect, where she wasn't a woman who had sold a night of her life, where she wasn't drowning in bills and heartbreak, where she wasn't supposed to wake up and walk away. She was just here, in his arms. And then reality struck. Her eyes snapped open. Logan. He was still asleep beside her, his face softer in slumber. The usual hard lines of his expression were relaxed, his breath slow and deep. His dark lashes fanned against his cheek, a stark contrast to the powerful, intimidating man he was when awake. And God, he was beautiful. Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away. What was she doing? She had to leave. This wasn't real. It could never be real. Slowly, carefully, she slipped out from under his arm, the warmth of his body leaving her cold. She reached for her dress, the delicate fabric pooling around her as she pulled it over her skin. She needed to get out of here before... Stay! Emily froze. Her heart stopped. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, but then she felt his presence behind her, the heat of him, the soft rustle of sheets as he sat up. She turned slowly. Logan was watching her, his blue eyes darker than she had ever seen them. Stay. The word hung between them, heavy and full of something unspoken. She opened her mouth, struggling for words. Logan, Before she could finish, he stood walking toward her with an unreadable expression. Then without a word, he reached into a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote something down. Emily's breath hitched. Then he turned and held it out to her. She stared at it, confusion swirling inside her. Then her heart cracked. The number was double what they had agreed upon. Her hands trembled as she took it, her chest aching. So that was it. A night, a deal, a transaction. And now he was just paying her extra, like a tip for a job well done. Her throat tightened, a lump of pain forming so fast it stole her breath. She should be grateful. She should take it and go. But why did it hurt? Why did it feel like her heart was splintering into pieces? Logan was watching her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. As if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. But it didn't matter. Because Emily understood. She was nothing more than a contract fulfilled. She forced a smile, a broken, hollow thing. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, before he could see the tears threatening to spill, she turned and walked away. Each step felt like a knife to the heart. She never saw Logan clench his fists, never saw the way his jaw tightened as she disappeared through the door, never heard the quiet, frustrated curse he muttered under his breath. Because he hadn't meant to let her go. He had just been trying to find an excuse to keep her close. And now, she was gone. The days that followed were unbearable. Emily tried to move on, forcing herself to focus on work, to push the memory of dates that night into the farthest corner of her heart. But it was impossible. She could still feel him. The way his lips had worshipped her skin, the way his hands had held her as if she was something precious, the way his voice had softened when he murmured her name against her neck, like she was more than just a deal. It was a dangerous illusion, and she had to bury it. So she threw herself into work, keeping her head down, avoiding Logan at all costs. But that was easier said than done, because Logan, he was a mess. From the moment she had walked out of his penthouse, a part of him had been restless. For years, Logan Bennett had lived by one rule: never get attached. Women were temporary, a way to escape, a game he always won. But Emily Carter? She was different. She had crawled under his skin, settled into the hollow spaces of his heart where no one else had ever been. And he hated it. He hated how much he wanted her. At the office, he found himself watching her. Every time she walked past his glass-walled office, he felt it. A pull so strong it made his fingers itch to reach for her. He noticed everything. The way she avoided his gaze. The way she smiled at everyone but him. The way she flinched when their hands accidentally brushed, like his touch burned her. She was trying to forget, trying to erase him. And Logan couldn't stand it. One evening, after a long meeting, he found himself standing at her desk, his heart pounding harder than it should. Emily froze, her fingers gripping the papers in front of her. She didn't look up. "Do you need something, Mr. Bennett?" Mr. Bennett. The way she said it, cold and professional, made something snap inside him. "Come to my office," he ordered. She stiffened. "I'm busy." "Now, Emily." Her chest rose and fell in a sharp breath, but after a long pause, she pushed her chair back and followed him. The moment they were inside, he shut the door. Silence. She crossed her arms, glaring at him. "What do you want?" Logan exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "You've been avoiding me." Emily let out a hollow laugh. "What did you expect? That I'd smile at you in the hallway? That I'd pretend nothing happened?" Logan took a step closer. Too close. "I don't want to pretend," he said, his voice lower, rougher. "I can't." Her heart pounded. "Logan, I need you, Emily." The words hit her like a storm, stealing the air from her lungs. Her lips parted, shock flickering across her face. "Number." No. He wasn't supposed to say that. He wasn't supposed to need her, because needing meant weakness. And she had been a man's weakness before. She knew how it ended. In heartbreak. In destruction. Her chest tightened as painful memories resurfaced. The way her last love had betrayed her, leaving her alone, broken, and struggling. She had barely survived. And now Logan stood in front of her, offering something she couldn't afford to feel. So she did the only thing she could. She pushed him away. "Whatever this is, Logan," she whispered, stepping back. "It's over." His jaw clenched. "You don't mean that." She met his gaze, forcing herself to ignore the pain in his eyes, the pain that mirrored her own. "Yes, I do." Then, before her resolve could shatter, She turned and walked out, leaving Logan standing there, fists clenched, heart bleeding, and for the first time in his life. He realized that losing her terrified him more than anything else ever had. Logan had never known jealousy before, not like this. He had always been the man others envied, the one who had everything, the one who never had to fight for anyone's attention. Until Emily. Until the day he saw her laughing with Daniel. It was just a simple laugh, a fleeting moment, but it ignited something dark and dangerous inside him. Daniel was new to the company, handsome, confident, and far too interested in Emily. And the worst part? She let him be. She smiled at him. She looked at him. She let him stand too close. Logan watched from his office, gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Something savage curled in his chest. She was pushing him away, acting like their night together had meant nothing, like he hadn't touched every inch of her, like she hadn't moaned his name in the dark. And now she was smiling at another man. Number hell no. He stood abruptly, ignoring the way his blood pounded in his ears. He needed to get out of here before he did something reckless, before he dragged her away in front of everyone and reminded her exactly who she belonged to. That night, he lost control. The office was quiet, most employees gone, but Emily was still here. So was Daniel. Logan saw them by the break room, saw Daniel touch her arm, saw her throw her head back in laughter, his vision blurred with fury. His footsteps were silent but determined. As he strode toward her, the possessiveness raging inside him like wildfire. Emily turned at the last second, her smile fading when she saw the storm in his eyes. "Logan!" He grabbed her wrist, ignoring the way Daniel frowned in confusion. "We need to talk." Emily's pulse jumped beneath his fingers. "I'm busy." Logan's grip tightened. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind her that he wasn't in the mood for her stubborn defiance. "Now, Emily." Something in his tone made her hesitate. Finally, with a sigh, she turned to Daniel. "I'll see you later." Logan didn't give Daniel the chance to respond. He pulled Emily down the hall, his body thrumming with frustration, jealousy, and something deeper, something he refused to name. The moment they were alone, he spun her around, trapping her against the wall. She gasped, her wide eyes locking onto his. His hands rested on either side of her, his breath ragged, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Logan leaned in, his voice dark and raw. "Do you think he can touch you the way I did?" Emily sucked in a sharp breath. "Logan, stop! Do you think he can kiss you the way I did?" He continued, his lips just inches from hers. Her pulse thundered. Logan's fingers curled into fists against the wall, his entire body aching to claim her again, to erase every trace of another man from her skin. But instead of kissing her, he did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He let go. His hands dropped to his sides, his jaw clenching as he stepped back. When he spoke again, his voice broke. "You're in my blood, Emily." Her breath hitched. "I don't know how to let you go." For a moment, she softened. For a moment, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, like she wanted to believe him. But then just as quickly, her guard slammed back into place. She lifted her chin, her voice cold. "You have to." Then, without waiting for his response, she pushed past him, disappearing down the hall. Logan didn't move, didn't breathe, because for the first time in his life he realized she wasn't just a woman he wanted. She was the one woman he couldn't live without. And he had no idea how to make her see that. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she could breathe again. Logan's words still haunted her. "You're in my blood, Emily. I don't know how to let you go." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that what she felt for him wasn't a mistake, that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just an obsession or a game to him. But hope was dangerous, and she had been burned before. Still, every time their eyes met across the office, Every time his hand brushed against hers, every time she caught him staring at her with that intensity that stole the breath from her lungs, she wavered. She was so close to giving in, so close to admitting that maybe Logan did feel something real for her. And then Sophie arrived. The office buzzed with whispers the moment Sophie Laurent stepped inside. Tall, blonde, and dangerously beautiful, she was a woman who belonged in Logan Bennett's world. Polished, confident, and utterly untouchable. She walked in like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors as she made her way straight to Logan's office. Emily's stomach twisted, a sick feeling creeping into her chest. Who was she? She didn't have to wait long for an answer. That's Sophie Laurent, a voice whispered near her. Logan's ex-fiancée. Emily's heart stopped. Ex-fiancée? Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the papers in her grip. She didn't want to care. She shouldn't care. But she did. And when Sophie turned her head and locked eyes with Emily, she knew the other woman had noticed. Sophie smirked. Then, without breaking eye contact, she walked toward her. Emily stiffened, her breath catching as Sophie stopped in front of her desk, arms crossed, amusement dancing in her cold blue eyes. So, Sophie mused, her voice dripping with condescension, you're the new entertainment. Emily's blood ran cold. She forced herself to stay calm. Excuse me? Sophie let out a soft, mocking laugh. Oh, darling, don't be shy. I know Logan's type. You're pretty sure, but... She leaned in, her voice turning to a whisper. Do you really think he loves you? Emily's throat tightened. Sophie tilted her head, watching her reaction like a predator. You were just a night of fun. I, on the other hand, belong in his world. Emily couldn't breathe. She didn't want to believe her, but deep down, wasn't this the truth she had been afraid of all along? Logan was a billionaire CEO, a man who had everything. She was just his employee, a woman who had come to him out of desperation, a woman he had paid for. Her vision blurred, her heart shattering, as Sophie gave her one last smirk and walked away, disappearing into Logan's office. Emily stood there, her hands shaking. This was her answer. She had been foolish to think she meant something to him, foolish to think she could ever be a part of his world. And so, she made her decision. She grabbed her things, her breath uneven as she walked to her desk, pulled out a resignation letter she had written weeks ago but never submitted, and signed it. Then, without looking back, she placed it on her supervisor's desk and walked out of Bennett Enterprises, out of Logan's life forever. Her heart might be broken, but she refused to let herself be played again. Logan Bennett was in her past, and she was never coming back. Logan had never known fear, not like this. Not the kind that clawed at his chest, making it hard to breathe. Not the kind that came with the terrifying realization that she was gone. Emily, the woman who had set his world on fire, the woman who had made him feel alive for the first time in years, and now she had walked out of his life because of Sophie, because of his own damn mistakes. He slammed his car door shut, his heart pounding like a war drum as he sped through the city. The rain lashed against the windshield, the streets a blur as he drove like a man possessed. He had to stop her, had to tell her the truth before it was too late. By the time he reached her apartment, he was soaked to the bone, his shirt clinging to his skin, his hair dripping with rain. But he didn't care, because the moment he saw the light in her window, he knew she was still here. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his pulse racing as he reached her door. Then he knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. His jaw clenched. To hell with it. He pushed the door open and found her. Emily stood in the middle of the room, a half-packed suitcase on the floor, her hands frozen around a pile of clothes. Her eyes went wide when she saw him, wet, breathless, desperate. Logan? Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't speak, didn't think. He just moved. In 3 strides, he was in front of her, his hands gripping her face, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss so raw, so desperate, it stole the air from her lungs. She gasped against his mouth, her fingers instinctively fisting his soaked shirt as he kissed her like a man on the verge of losing his sanity, like a man on his knees for her. "I don't want Sophie," he rasped against her lips, his breath ragged. "I don't want anyone else. I want you." Emily trembled, her chest heaving as she pushed him back, her tear-filled eyes searching his. "Logan?" She swallowed hard. "You'll wake up one day and realize I was just a phase." He exhaled sharply, his hands tightening on her waist. "A phase?" His voice broke. "Emily, you wrecked me. Do you understand that?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't mean that." Logan let out a bitter laugh, his forehead pressing against hers. "Then tell me why I feel like I can't fucking breathe without you." Emily's lips parted, but no words came, because deep down she felt the same. She always had, but she was terrified. Terrified that one day he would wake up and realize she wasn't the woman he wanted, that she wasn't meant to be in his world, that she was just the girl he had paid for once upon a time. Logan saw the fear in her eyes, and it broke him. He cupped her face gently, forcing her to look at him. "I know what you're thinking," he whispered. "I know you're scared. But Emily, you're the only thing that's ever felt real in my entire damn life." Her breath hitched. Logan's thumb brushed against her cheek, wiping away her tears. "I don't care about Sophie. I don't care about anyone else. I need you." Silence. A war raged in Emily's heart. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But what if he changed his mind? What if one day he realized he needed someone like Sophie, polished, wealthy, perfect? She wasn't perfect. She was just Emily. Logan saw the hesitation in her eyes, and he did the only thing he could. He dropped his forehead against hers, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." Emily's breath stuttered, because Logan Bennett didn't beg. Not for anyone, but for her. He would. The air between them crackled, heavy with emotions neither of them could escape. And when Emily finally lifted her gaze to meet his, her resolve crumbled. Because she knew. She had always belonged to him, and he had always belonged to her. Logan had always believed that money could solve everything. But this time, he wasn't trying to fix a problem. He was trying to prove something, that his love for Emily wasn't temporary, that she wasn't just a passing phase, that she was his everything. For days, Emily refused to see him. She avoided his calls, ignored his texts. She was trying to move on, trying to remind herself that men like Logan Bennett didn't fall in love with women like her. But Logan wasn't a man who gave up, not when it came to her. So he did something he had never done before. He put his heart on the line. It started with a letter, a simple white envelope that arrived at her door with only 4 words written on the front: "A place for you." Inside was an address. No explanation, no signature, just an address. Emily frowned, her fingers tightening around the paper. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something about it pulled at her. And so, the next morning, she found herself standing in front of a cozy little cafe. Her breath hitched. The place looked exactly like the cafe she used to dream about, the one she had always wanted to own. The brick walls, the soft golden lights, the big bay windows where she had always imagined people sitting with their books, sipping coffee on rainy days. It was perfect. Her hand shook as she hesitantly stepped inside. The moment she did, a woman behind the counter greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Carter?" Emily nodded slowly. The woman handed her a folder. "This is yours." Emily blinked. "What?" "Logan Bennett transferred the ownership to your name this morning." Her heart stopped. No, that wasn't possible. Her hands trembled as she flipped open the folder, and there it was, her name, on the ownership papers. The cafe was hers. Tears blurred her vision. But before she could even process it, the woman spoke again. "Oh, and he also made a donation." Emily's breath caught. "A donation?" The woman nodded. "To the hospital." The words hit her like a thunderclap. "He paid off every outstanding medical bill in your mother's name," the woman continued, "and he set up a fund so she'll always have access to the best care no matter what happens." Emily's knees almost buckled. Her mother's hospital bills. The stress, the exhaustion, the fear she had been carrying for so long, all of it was gone. Because of him. Her vision blurred as tears spilled down her cheeks, her hands gripping the folder as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. Why would he do this? Why would a man like Logan Bennett, a billionaire, a man who could have anyone he wanted, go to such lengths for her? It wasn't just money. It wasn't just generosity. It was love. A love so overwhelming, so deep, that it stole the air from her lungs. She had spent so long convincing herself that he would never love her the way she loved him. But she had been wrong, so terribly, heartbreakingly wrong. And now, she had to find him. Because this time she wouldn't run. She wouldn't push him away. She would fight for him, just like he had fought for her. Emily had finally made up her mind. No more doubts, no more fears. She loved Logan Bennett, and she was going to tell him. But just as she was about to reach his office, her phone vibrated. One message. Breaking news. Billionaire Logan Bennett's secret lover exposed. Her stomach dropped. With shaking fingers, she clicked the link and froze. Because plastered all over the news were pictures of her and Logan. Intimate, passionate. From that night, the night that changed everything. The night she thought was just between them. And now the whole world knew. Her heart pounded as she scrolled down, seeing article after article ripping her apart. Unknown assistant seduces billionaire boss for money. Gold digger caught in the act. See the shocking photos. Logan Bennett's dirty little secret exposed. Emily's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. How did they get these photos? Sophie? Of course. She should have known Logan's manipulative ex wouldn't just walk away. The walls closed in on her, panic crashing over her like a tidal wave. She needed to run. She needed to disappear before this destroyed her completely. But then her phone rang. Logan. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to answer, wanted to hear his voice, to believe that he would make this all go away. But she knew how this worked. Men like Logan Bennett didn't fight for women like her. He would protect his image, his company, his reputation, not her, never her. So she did the only thing she could. She let the call go to voicemail. Then, with tears blurring her vision, she left. But Logan wasn't a man who gave up, not when it came to her. So when Emily turned on the news later that night, she didn't expect to see him. Standing in front of a swarm of reporters, his jaw tight, his eyes stormy with fury. The reporters shouted questions at him, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mess. "Mr. Bennett, is it true she seduced you for money? Did she blackmail you into a relationship? Is Emily Carter just another gold digger?" The words made her stomach turn. But Logan, he didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow step forward, gripping the podium like he was holding himself back from tearing the world apart. Then, in a voice sharp as a blade, he said, "You want the truth?" Silence fell. Every camera, every microphone, every eye in the room focused on him. Logan exhaled, his gaze burning with something undeniable. "Yes, I love her." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily's heart stopped. Logan's voice dropped lower, filled with an emotion so raw it made her chest ache. "I love Emily Carter, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it. The world erupted. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, but Logan ignored them all. He looked straight into the lenses as if he knew she was watching, and then with quiet, unshakable certainty, he said, "She is not a gold digger. She is not my secret. She is my heart, my future. And if you have a problem with that, then that's your damn problem, not mine." Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, a sob tearing through her, because this was love. Unapologetic, unbreakable, the kind of love that stood in the fire and refused to burn. And in that moment she knew. She couldn't run anymore. She wouldn't run anymore, because Logan Bennett had just given up everything for her, and now it was her turn to fight for him. Emily stood outside Logan's penthouse, her heart pounding. Everything had changed. The scandal, the heartbreak, the fight, and through it all, Logan never let go. He had fought for her, defended her. He had loved her, even when she was too afraid to believe it. Now it was her turn. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Logan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city lights. His suit jacket was discarded, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired, worn, like a man who had given his heart away and was terrified he might never get it back. She took a shaky step forward. "Logan." He turned, and when he saw her, everything changed. The exhaustion disappeared. The pain melted away, and in its place, relief. "Emily," he breathed. She didn't wait, didn't hesitate. She ran straight into his arms. Logan caught her instantly, his arms crushing her against him, his face buried in her hair, his breath warm against her skin. "Tell me you're staying," he whispered, his voice raw. Emily pulled back, cupping his face. Tears shone in her eyes. "I'm staying," she whispered. Logan's breath hitched, and then he kissed her. Not like before, not desperate or possessive, but tender, slow, unshakably real. Because this wasn't just passion, this was forever. Months passed, and their love only grew stronger. No more doubts, no more barriers, just them. One evening, Logan led Emily to a rooftop garden where fairy lights twinkled like stars. A table was set for two, overlooking the city. Emily gasped, "Logan, this is beautiful." But Logan wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her, his future. With a deep breath, he dropped to one knee. Emily's hands flew to her mouth. "Marry me," Logan said, his voice filled with all the love he had ever felt for her. Emily's vision blurred with tears. "I thought you were afraid to love," she whispered. Logan smiled, his eyes shining. "I was." Then he took her hand, pressing it over his heart. "But you changed that. You changed everything." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Emily Carter," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, fiercely, deeply, completely." Emily let out a shaky laugh. Then, with her heart bursting with love, she whispered, "Yes?" The moment the word left her lips, Logan surged to his feet, capturing her in a breathtaking kiss. The city lights shimmered around them. The stars watched as two souls, once lost, finally found home in each other. And just like that, one night had brought them together. But love made them stay. The soft melody of violins filled the grand cathedral, echoing through the candlelit space. Every seat was filled, yet the only person Emily saw was him. Logan, standing at the altar dressed in the sharpest black tuxedo, his eyes only for her. Her breath hitched. She had once thought that night was her biggest mistake. But now, as she took slow, measured steps toward the man who had stolen her heart, she realized it wasn't a mistake. It was fate. The past year had been a whirlwind, from pain to passion, from doubt to devotion, from a simple deal to an undeniable forever. Logan had spent every moment proving his love, not with grand gestures, but in the quiet, intimate ways that truly mattered, like the way he held her at night as if she was the most precious thing in the world, or how he kissed her forehead before he left for work, whispering, "I'll miss you." Or the way he memorized all the little things about her, how she liked her coffee, the way she curled into him when she was cold, the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about dreams she never thought would come true, until Logan, until him. Now, standing at the altar, Logan couldn't take his eyes off her. Emily was breathtaking in her lace wedding gown, her hair falling in soft waves around her face. But it wasn't just her beauty that stole his breath. It was her. The woman who had turned his world upside down, who had made him believe in love again, who had changed him forever. As she reached him, he took her hand, his grip firm, steady, like a silent vow that he would never let go. The priest spoke, but Logan barely heard a word. All he could focus on was Emily. And when it was time for the vows, his voice shook with emotion. "I spent my whole life building walls," he confessed. "I thought love was just another risk I couldn't afford." Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But then you came into my life, and in just one night, you shattered every wall, every doubt, every fear." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "That night changed everything, because it gave me you." Emily let out a soft, choked laugh, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd believe in love," she whispered. "But then you walked in and showed me what it really meant." She took a deep breath. "You changed me, Logan, in ways I never thought possible." Her fingers tightened around his. "And I promise to love you fiercely and unconditionally for the rest of my life." The room was silent, a sacred, beautiful silence. And then, "You may kiss the bride." Logan didn't wait, didn't hesitate. He captured Emily's lips in a kiss that was more than love. It was a promise, a vow, a lifetime written in a single moment. As the guests cheered, as petals rained down around them, Logan lifted Emily into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed in pure, unfiltered joy. And in that moment, as they held on to each other, they both knew that one night, the one that had started as desperation, was actually destiny. It had led them here, to this love, to this forever, and it had changed everything.